especially when you compare with previous years?
Thank you very much. It is quite resounding that these leaders, more or less, probably without even seeing each other's scripts, have spoken with one voice. We cannot say these issues they have raised are new. However, they have focused on these matters for the world to address. Nevertheless, most of what they spoke about supported the ideas and proposals of the UN Secretary General, which came out in the UNGA UN at 80 report with the title Shifting Paradigm, United to Deliver.
And then I like that you mentioned just a common thread, we see running through all of the speeches, whether it's climate change, the permanent seat, and then issues around, recognizing maybe the war in Gaza. It seems, like they compared notes. Why haven't we been doing this in terms of maybe not comparing notes, but ensuring that the issues that matter to the continent, are put on the front burner when we leave the shores of this country to address global leaders?
Elsewhere, it's been described that the UN is under stress and indeed being transformed. Insiders have told me that UN has, I won't say sacked, but relieved of their duties thousands of staff. UN is not well funded as we speak. The multilateralism that typifies the work of the UN has witnessed rivalry amongst great powers. There is fragmentation and indeed equity and fairness is really, really diminishing. So the UN is actually, or the globe is actually witnessing tough times, especially with all the conflicts all over the world, that world leaders should have come together through the Security Council and its non-permanent members to resolve. Rather, the world is in serious crisis. In fact, protectionism and unilateralism is really, really in fact, also regionalism is a trend today. Of course, the UN is getting the bashing, as we have witnessed. However, the UN is indispensable.
Sure.
And the UN remains
So one of the things that we also heard was President Tinubu pushing for Nigeria to have a permanent seat on the Security Council to make global institutions fairer and more effective. But for President Ruto of Kenya, he talked about reforms, and I mean, a very fiery statement he made. He said UN reforms are not a favor for Africa, but a necessity for the organization's own survival. How valid are these statements?
I must say these statements are valid. They buttress the fact that there must be equity and, legitimacy, as it were. And as mentioned in the speech by the President Tinubu, you will find out that we're not in 1945, when in 2025, things have happened and the UN must evolve. Furthermore, I can also confirm here that the report by the SG has really identified the need for deep reforms, and it is really cutting down on its activities. Today, there are three paradigms this report has emphasized: everyday work, cross-pillar work, and enabling, the paradigm of enabling impact. And these will sit on four key areas: peace and security, humanitarian assistance. We also have the human rights and sustainable development. You agree with me that we are at midpoint assessment of the SDGs, and the UN by 2030 will have reached the benchmark for the SDGs. Africa is still lagging behind, and there is need for more resources to be channeled towards supporting Africa to attain these realities. You also agree that it is not enough for the UN to do its part. Every nation, indeed every African nation, must also stand up to these challenges. Not just the federal government, as it were in the case of Nigeria, but also sub-nationals like states, indeed local government. They must be attuned with these SDG goals and work towards achieving those goals. So basically, it is time for the world to reform. It is also time for great leaders or great powers to consider the voices of a place like Africa, where indeed the natural resources mainly support technology and development in their capitals and indeed in their countries.
Dr. Cook, I'll put you on hold. Interesting points you made there. I would like us to unpack it when we return from this break. Stay with us, everyone. Thanks for staying with us on World Now. We've been speaking on the addresses by African leaders at the UNGA and just the common issues raised by all leaders. We've been speaking with Dr. Patrick Coker. He's a former spokesperson, UN Mission in Sierra Leone. Thank you so much, Dr. Coker, for staying with us.
Thank you very much.
So you were talking about more funding earlier for, to be channeled to Africa in terms of, just handling issues around the SDGs. But a lot of, and you've talked about also the significant contribution made by Africa in terms just on the global stage. And you're right on that. We've made very significant contribution when it comes to global peacekeeping efforts. But some people have also raised issues around the conflicts on the continent, which we have not been able to mediate, for example, Sudan. When you also look at the DR Congo Chad crisis and M23 rebels, it took the intervention of the US president to get that sorted. It is still not sorted, but at least he intervened. And many have said, look, if we are not able to deal with local issues, then why should we get that seat? And that could be a hindrance.
Thank you very much. Conflicts in Africa cannot, the root causes of conflict in Africa cannot be isolated to the environment, the African environment alone. There are external forces concerning this conflict. If you map the conflicts in Africa, most of them are resource-based. DR Congo conflict has been for a long time. And these external forces definitely help to sustain and fuel most of the conflicts. For example, South Sudan or Sudan do not produce weapons. That means they buy these weapons from somewhere. And these are oil-producing countries. Recently, I gathered that South Sudan has gold. So these resources help to fund this conflict. However, African countries, African leaders can come together and, firmly decide that, look, we have to end this conflict. because they are creating humanitarian crisis. Well over 2 million Sudanese are displaced, both internally and displaced outside their countries. And this humanitarian crisis cannot continue. In any case, most of the support for all these IDPs are not supported from within Africa. The support definitely comes from outside Africa. So if the sources of weapons or sources of, carrying out the fighting can be dealt with, that probably will also help to reduce or get them to the table to negotiate. As long as the weapons are available, the ammunitions are available, the leaders continue to struggle for power and control, the fighting will continue, and indeed, the suffering in Africa will continue. Basically, if this can be done by African leaders, then that's one way to reduce or minimize or stop this conflict. Another aspect is the fact that even within the global setting, the UN, through the Security Council, that is supposed to be the last port of call to resolve conflict. There is no cohesion. They don't agree. You will agree with me also that conflicts like that of Ukraine continue to subsist because these members of the Security Council, including the non-permanent members, have not come to an agreement on way forward. So this rivalry also fester all these conflicts.
And we continue to see the use of the veto power. Again, what you just said, perhaps why it is important for Africa to have a permanent state so we can be there when our own issues are discussed. But I just wanted to ask, after these beautiful addresses that we've given, how important is it that we have follow-up actions on the continent, especially one that is driven by the African Union?
Well, I think African Union has a role to play. That means it's a regional body that is recognized by the UN. And indeed, I must say that after all these speeches, the SG takes it from there. That means he gets his mandate to implement the proposal he has presented to all these leaders. In the implementation, one key thing we must consider is the UN must be funded by member states. As we speak, if we check the record, many member states have not met their obligations. So how does AU come in here? AU must also continue to take a cue from some of the points made and pursue their own agenda. As it were, Africa also has its own agenda, and align it with the UN in order for them to achieve some of those issues, resolve some of those issues that have been highlighted. However, if this is not done, then it reduces the effort to just rhetorics and statement making. But I can assure you that with the one voice that African leaders went into the General Assembly this year, there's a lot to run with, especially with the new AU leadership.
Dr. Coker, we have the world's attention at the moment. I hope that the Africa as a whole is able to take advantage of it and drive the change that we need. Thank you so much for your time. Former spokesperson, UN Mission in Sierra Leone, Dr. Patrick Coker.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's just give you more update on the speech by the president of Nigeria through his vice president, Kashim Shettima. Kashim Shettima also used his UN General Assembly speech to deliver a clear message on climate change. Where he said this is no longer just an environmental issue. It is a matter of security, migration, and survival. Vice President Chetima said climate action must go beyond words, urging the United Nations and global partners to channel more resources into education, resilient housing, technology, and financing, so vulnerable communities can become part of the solution, not the problem. He stressed that tackling climate change is a shared responsibility and called for smarter use of climate funds to support local adaptation. According to him, only by investing in people and resilience today can the world prevent deeper crises tomorrow. Let's not forget that we also saw President Trump on Tuesday call renewable sources of energy like wind power a joke and blasted the UN's climate efforts. Now, how the world will react to this disparity of information remains to be seen as the UNGA continues, and we will continue to bring you update here on TVC News and World Now. That's What Now. Thanks for watching. I am Precious Amayo.